I'm telling you, this guy, I've seen this happen too, where a guy who was making pizza needs the dough and throws it up in the air, and it hits something and cradles over something or other, and it never comes down. And so we're in a restaurant in Brooklyn, and it happens, and now I don't know if we're ever going to get the pizza at the table, but that's okay because we got a conversation here about a fellow by the name of Bernie Sanders who's running for president, and we're gonna chat about Bernie Sanders and our take on him and some of his perspective. But first of all, both of you were talking about how Bernie.
Wait a second. You know, when that pizza doesn't come down,
yeah,
all right, it's an eye opener.
It is.
It's an eye opener, and that's what Bernie Sanders is. He's an eye opener. He's like a pizza that flies up and doesn't come down, and all of a sudden, people are wondering, people are looking, then they start talking, and hopefully they start listening.
And yet we're not really surprised by anything he says because there's a guy that's been pretty consistent for, how long has he been in Congress? 40 years?
At least 40 years. He's been around a long time.
And let's talk about some of the things he...
he's one of those. He's an intelligent Brooklyn Jew. All right? And I don't want to sound like I'm biased, but there's something about a Jewish lawyer that breeds success, okay? And the reason there's success there is because there's hard work, there's education, all right? A Jewish family values education. Bernie is well educated. He made his way through Brooklyn, found himself as a senator in Vermont, and he's saying things that real people want to hear. Why? I'll tell you why. Because right now, David, now in our society, there's a certain inequity. Now, there's always an inequity, but right now, the inequity is just a little too great. When 1% of the population is controlling 90% of the wealth, okay, and the rest of us, okay, are where we are, okay, that's serious inequity.
Why do you suppose, though, all of a sudden it has become an issue? You know, for years and years, the people in the United States accepted that there were large disparities between very, very wealthy people and the rest of the population. And in fact, in a way, I think that they idolized those people. I mean, for example, the people in Hollywood certainly were big earners. And goodness knows there were so many magazines about the theatricals, and people loved them. And it was they weren't turned off by the disparity in wealth.
No,
but
because
I think
there was a route, Miles. There was a route that people could take so that they could travel up and down. Now, the situation has developed to such an extent that mobility has been seriously stifled.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that's an important issue.
Is it hard?
In other words, something fundamentally
for
changed.
Folks to work their way up the ladder, so to speak? Is it become more difficult, and why? Why has it become more difficult if it has?
Their ability to generate funds, their ability to work, and make the kinds of money necessary to move from one economic class to the next has been stifled. They've been severely exploited, and the opportunities that once existed have been stripped away.
I don't know. Is that really true? I'm not saying yes or no, but it seems that we have examples of unbelievable creation of wealth. You know, like Zuckerberg, takes this little notion about hooking people up for dates in a college, and it turns into a multi-billion-dollar business. And not only is it Mark, It's all these people who work for him writing code. And many of them do not come from affluent backgrounds, right? So it's true that some people feel that there isn't an upward path, but on the other hand, we have a lot of proof that there is. So what has happened that has changed people's feeling about the American dream? I'm not so sure, but maybe I would put this on the table. Maybe the people who are participating in the American dream today are people who have educations that enable them to take advantage of the opportunities in technology. Whereas turning the clock back, it could have been that somebody who was a baker, real good baker, and he didn't have any education to speak of, but he was good at what he did. He would open up a bakery, he'd open up another bakery, and soon the guy was very affluent because he had exploited something that that there wasn't a barrier to, like there is, today.
Well, let's take a step backwards, back to I think it was December of 2000, as Clinton was finishing up his presidency. George W. Bush hadn't taken office yet. We had just gone through this horrible battle over who was actually going to be president. And in the midst of all that, the Congress overturned, basically threw out of something that had been in place for since the Depression, Glass-Steagall, which created a lid on what banks could do, what types of investment activity they could become involved in, which apparently had kept us out of a depression for many, many decades. And they took it and they threw it out without much fanfare. I think it was a 98-0 vote in the Senate. 8 years later, I think it's safe to say the chickens came home to roost, that all the things that happened between 2000 and 2008 led us into this incredibly difficult time financially, where the economy essentially fell apart.
Well, we got to remember, David, that we have Democrats and we have Republicans and we have Green Party and we have Liberal, but we got one party that people fail to understand, fail to perceive, to appreciate. That party is the money party. See, the money party is very powerful. The money party is interested in a Democratic candidate. The money party is also interested in a Republican candidate. The money party actually puts money into these campaigns. The reason the money party puts money into these campaigns because the money party has an agenda, and that particular agenda can be satisfied if the money party has strong influence over one particular political party or another particular party or what have you. Now, in the case of Glass-Steagall, you had banks, that lent money, banks that you can borrow money from, and they operated within certain restrictions. You also had investment companies and hedge companies, and they also operated, but they operated under different rules and regulations. They took risks. Those risks were limited when it came to the savings and loans and the family banks, and rightfully so, because money that was in the family banks and the savings and loan banks, they were under something called the FDIC,
Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
Right, that money was insured, and if anything was to occur, the government then would come in and back up those banks with taxpayer money.
In exchange for the regulations that they imposed.
Well, those regulations protected the taxpayer. But when those banks now could operate without certain rules and regulations, when those banks could operate like investment companies and hedge funds, we got another ball game here. We have a totally different ball game here. And what happens is Wall Street sees a certain financial gain in operating in conjunction with all this financial activity that's going on.
Now, you guys know a little something growing up in Brooklyn. Know a little something about gambling.
About stickball.
About stickball too. Stickball too. But gambling, where you have the bookie. Back in the days, I guess there are still bookies. They're still out there, I guess.
Right.
And the bookie takes bets, and the bookie takes their vig. They're going to get something no matter whether this side wins, this side wins.
Odds.
It doesn't matter.
Odds. Yeah.
They've got themselves covered. They're going to pull out 5%, let's say,
whatever,
out of the entirety of what's bet.
Yeah.
So they're doing fine. Isn't that kind of similar to what Wall Street has done?
Well,
they're going to get theirs.
Well, the thing that happened when the collapse occurred back in 08 and 09 was that banks were writing mortgages, and then in effect they were selling them. And the mortgages were bundled. They used the word bundled. And the bundling process enabled them to make a batch of bonds that they could call AAA.
Right.
When in reality there were a lot of bonds, mortgages in the grouping that were way below AAA.
And there was a degree of trust in those banks that they were doing it on the up and up. I'm a realtor, so I can understand the process of mortgage financing and how the money is shuffled back around to create new mortgages.
And the rating companies were in cahoots with the large investment firms.
Well, what happened was you might say the cahoots occurred because the companies that rated these bundled bonds were being complicit. In other words, rather than really looking at the picture and determining what the risk was, they were going along. And notably among them was Standard & Poor's. All right?
Yep.
When S&P would, or was it Fitch is the other one, I think, and Moody's, when they would put the seal of good housekeeping on bundled bonds, people would say, "Oh, this is AAA."
Yeah.
And they would dive in, with both feet and buy up the stuff. And then, to complicate matters, when people realized that there is some risk to this, they started selling coverage for the risk, right? And there was no end of hanky-panky that went into the coverage, because the coverage itself was really fraudulent. And finally, when it was realized that this was a house of cards, it came down really big time, right? Terrible.
And they were packaging the mortgages. There was a certain number of mortgages within the package that Wall Street bought, and then Wall Street was selling, and they were making a big profit. There was a certain percentage of them that were, let's put it, not as sweet. All right, but that small percentage that were not as sweet, okay, that would be offset, and the percentage of profit, all right, would still exceed any of the losses. But greed and the desire for more and more and more of these mortgage packages put pressure on the banks to lend more and more money to people who, for all intent and purposes, couldn't pay.
That's right.
But no one cared.
Yeah. So
because
maybe we should bring this back, around the circle to the subject at hand. A socialist, Bernie, who feels that the government has a larger role to play than it's currently playing. And I think this discussion that we just had really supports that. Somebody has to really be the watchdog. Somebody has to make sure that the banks do not engage in this sort of stuff, because ultimately the taxpayer pays for this, and people do lose their jobs. There is terrible hardship and dislocation.
The same way we've seen recently where somebody was selling peanuts that were tainted, and thankfully by dint of the government being on top of things, our FDA
Yes.
he was caught and sent to prison.
Yes.
Right.
These are great things that our government does to make our lives, to create a safety net for all of us, so that we can't get sold tainted peanuts or
even water for that matter.
But banks and Wall Street, pharmaceutical companies, they don't deal in peanuts.
Right.
They're dealing in big bucks. And
they can do just as much damage.
The only institution the people have as an advocate is the government. But if the personnel, running the government is in the pocket of the big money, where's the advocacy for the people? It's not there.
It makes it very difficult to trust. The same way you mentioned that before we came on, about how your family, because of what had happened back in the Depression, was very distrustful of banks and tried to steer clear of banks at all costs. And this is the kind of thing that creates, if there's a distrust of any institution that we count on to, they want to turn a profit, but not at the expense of us, the regular folks, the consumer, if you will, then if that distrust is engendered, then it creates a very difficult situation. And I think you very aptly pointed that out with your family's very great reluctance to go to banks for financing, to trust them.
Well, they were burned during the Depression.
I just bought a house down in Florida. Well, it was about a year and a half ago.
Yep. And
within 4 weeks of the time that I bought the house, and it was financed through a bank on Sanibel Island, actually.
Yep.
The loan was sold to a company in Ohio.
Happens very quickly. Yeah,
unbelievable.
Absolutely.
I was shocked about that. Yeah.
Banks do have to divulge when they do a mortgage for you. They do have to give you the probability, the likelihood that the loan that you've taken with them isn't going to be with them for very long. They're forced by regulation to tell you that. And it's a good thing, so you can kind of have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about that and to know a little bit about the way money is shuffled around. But go on.
Well, I just wanted to make that point. In other words, here we were, 7 years after the debacle, and perhaps it was going on. I don't know. I don't know how up and up this company is in Ohio, but the loans are being sold by a local bank.
Yeah, good opportunity to put a shout out to local banks, because local banks, not the mega banks, not your the Wells Fargo and Chase and J.P. Morgan, those ones. The local banks are the ones that are more likely to hold on to your mortgage. They're the banks you probably should consider putting your business with, rather than banks that really, in fact, aren't your neighbors and have less likelihood to care about you.
If you can find one.
They're out there. They're out there. Even in Connecticut, we've got some great ones. I'm going to throw a shout out to People's Bank, Newtown Savings Bank, Danbury Savings Bank,
Richfield Bank, Fairfield County Bank,
Fairfield County Bank, Union Savings Bank. There's a lot of great banks out there that are more inclined not only to treat you properly as a customer, but more likely to reinvest in the community. The money that they're earning, they're going to reinvest by loaning out to small businesses in the community. Through the Small Business Administration. Thank you very much, federal government, for having a great small business administration that helps small businesses be competitive against what seems like overwhelming odds from large corporations. So we're talking about Bernie Sanders, and we reflect a lot of what Bernie talks about and has been talking about for 40 years. And connect Bernie Sanders, let's connect him to other historical figures that we have a lot of faith in. Franklin Roosevelt,
Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt, my personal favorite of all time, slightly ahead of Abraham Lincoln, but connect them. What is Bernie talking about
Bernie's talking
that Teddy talked about?
Well, Bernie's talking about too big to fail.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if it's too big to fail, it may be too big to exist.
Mm-hmm.
That's Bernie's thinking on this.
Maybe those are the banks and the institutions that probably are best left to fail. When they fail, they shouldn't be resuscitated and propped up in order to fail again.
Apparently, the resuscitation and the prompting up has simply made them more more difficult to deal with because they're considered now even more too big to fail. So it is problematic. Why are they too big to fail? Well, because they're so huge that they have tentacles, all right, that embrace economies throughout the world. Mm-hmm. And if you kill them or you limit them, you might cut off a tentacle, all right, that's going to put a certain amount of, or a serious amount of economic upheaval in some small, struggling country, maybe some third world country.
We're seeing this happen right now with people being forced to migrate from one country to another because, in fact, due to these multinational deals, these trade deals that years ago screwed Mexico when Mexico's corn crop was pretty much they couldn't compete with other countries.
Yeah, they couldn't compete with the United States.
Yeah, they couldn't compete with the United States corn crop simply because of the way that the treaty was written.
Yeah.
Well, thankfully, when our pizza guy in the kitchen threw the pizza up and it got caught on something, thankfully Miles sent out for matzah, so we're going to get matzah pretty soon in between shows. So and then we'll pick up and we'll start again. But let's talk more about Teddy Roosevelt, because it seems like we're seeing a lot of a fellow like Teddy Roosevelt shining through in Bernie Sanders, who we like very much as a candidate for president.
Well, he felt that some of the corporations were getting so large that they were putting a lot of the smaller businesses out of business.
Yeah.
And he felt that it was in the best interest of the country, the economy, and the people to break them up. I think the most recent breakup that I can think of in my lifetime is when Bell was broken up.
Bell Telephone,
Yeah,
Right.
That wasn't broken up by the government. That was broken up because they decided that they would be better off having Bell Labs, which was a development function, separated from the manufacturing function.
Okay, but what did
They did it themselves.
Fine, but what did that breakup give us? It gave us a lot more innovation.
Well, it gave us the loss of Bell Labs. It disintegrated, and ultimately it turned into Lucent, and Lucent went down the tubes. Incidentally, related to Carly Fiorina, and that's a different story. Right, Bell ultimately became part of Alcatel, a French company, and one of the great American assets, Bell Laboratories, company that was really involved in the development of the basic elements of computers. That operation was lost. It's gone.
That's the downside. What about an upside?
There's a guy at the next table that just mouthed me a question, and I wanted to throw that to you, John. He looks like he's got a kind of a ugly comb over, and I'm thinking, I think it is Donald Trump at the next table. Well, at any rate, his question was, Joe, explain to us what about horizontal monopolies and vertical monopolies, because I think this is a lot of what I heard about years ago, the notion of the vertical monopoly and the horizontal monopoly.
Well, you're going to have to enlighten me on this.
Oh, okay.
Vertical
I
and
think
horizontal
I can shed some light on this.
Why don't
go
you
ahead.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay.
A vertical monopoly is a monopoly, and I'll make an example. Suppose that a company is involved in making couches. I'm just going to pick an example.
Yeah.
Well, if they were vertically monopolized, they would be actually growing the cotton that would be used to make the fabric.
Right.
And they might be even growing the trees. They might be growing the trees to make the wooden parts of a chair.
So they own the actual
the whole thing,
the things that that they're going to put together in the factory.
Yes.
They own their raw
a couch.
materials.
Yeah. Ford believed in vertical monopolies.
What happens when the couches leave the factory? Where do they go? And are they selling the couches too?
Yeah. In other words, the company is vertically integrated from the source of its materials through its design, manufacturing, and marketing.
So they can control the price more effectively that way by saying, charge us whatever you want to for the couches, factory. Because we're going to add on a profit, and we're going to sell them.
Yeah.
If we're selling all the couches in America, we got it made.
That's the point. In other words, Henry Ford believed in this because he was selling almost all the cars in the United States, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, initially, until General Motors came along and the Dodge brothers.
So then a vertical monopoly would be a company owning all oil drilling, for example.
No, that would be horizontal. Yes,
horizontal. Horizontal owns a very few limited companies own all the oil drilling.
Right.
So what they sell, the oil that they drill out of the ground, is pretty much at their discretion.
Yes.
What they're going to charge.
And that's what led to the breakup of Standard Oil. Right. That's where ExxonMobil comes from today. Right. Yeah. They were just so big horizontally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was Teddy Roosevelt then, right? Standard Oil.
I don't know. I plead ignorance to his involvement.
It's during that decade or two that these things happen. Okay, the matzah's on the way. All right, we got to wrap it up. We're going to have some matzah, then we'll come back. It's been Progressive Soup. Joe, Miles, and David, and I'm presuming that Roberto has given us.
Are we off the air now?
Yeah, we're off the air.